black single father opened his garage in the middle of a blizzard to help a stranger whose motorcycle had died on the road. He didn't ask who she was, didn't ask if she had money. He fixed her bike, charged her $60, and made hot chocolate for her and his daughter, the reflex of a veteran who learned long ago to help first and ask questions never. 3 weeks later, news helicopters descended on that small town and called her the missing billionaire. Within 24 hours, the quiet black mechanic was being described by headlines as a man with a calculated agenda. When the world turned against him, would she stand up? If stories like this one stay with you, stories about ordinary people, quiet dignity, and the kind of courage that doesn't make the front page, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more where this came from. Now let's go back to that night in Aspen. Aspen, Colorado was the kind of town that looked beautiful in photographs and felt cold in person. Not because of the altitude, but because of the way certain people looked at you when you didn't belong. Marcus Webb had lived there for 9 years and understood this better than most. He was 38, broad-shouldered, with hands that knew the inside of an engine the way a surgeon knew anatomy, by feel, by instinct, by 10,000 hours of repetition. He had opened Webb's garage on the east end of town after 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 failed attempt at a quieter life in Denver. Aspen wasn't his first choice, but it had a vacancy, a reasonable lease, and a school district Lily deserved. What it didn't have was a way of making him feel fully welcome. He was respected, he knew that. People brought him their Range Rovers and their vintage bikes and their imported European sedans because Marcus Webb fixed things right the first time and never overcharged. But respect and belonging were different currencies, and Aspen had never offered him the second one. Clients sometimes asked for the price twice, as if they hadn't heard correctly the first time. Certain neighbors watched him pull into his own driveway with an attention they didn't give to anyone else on the block. And twice in the past 3 years, local police had pulled him over within 2 miles of his own shop. Routine checks, they said, though nothing about it ever felt routine. He didn't talk about these things often. He had learned in the Army that the men who complained the loudest were rarely the ones who lasted. So he kept his head down, kept his bay clean, and built his reputation one honest repair at a time. What the military had left him, beyond the discipline and the silence, was a reflex he couldn't switch off. Help first. In Kandahar, hesitating cost lives. In Aspen, that same instinct meant he was the one who stayed late when a customer's car broke down at closing time, the one who kept the garage lights on through bad weather, the one who opened the door at 11:30 on a Thursday night in the middle of a blizzard, without asking why. Lily was 8 years old and had her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, though she had never met her mother. She had grown up in the back room of the garage on weekends, doing homework on a folding table between oil cans, learning the names of tools before she learned multiplication. She was small and watchful, and asked the kind of questions that made adults pause. Not because they were difficult, but because they were precise. She had a habit of keeping one chair empty at the kitchen table. When Marcus asked her about it once, she shrugged and said, "In case someone needs it." He hadn't pushed. Sloane Everett was 35 and had appeared on the cover of 3 national magazines in the past 2 years, though she hadn't asked to be on any of them. She had built her company, a data infrastructure firm called Meridian, from a 1-bedroom apartment in Austin into a corporation valued at $4.2 billion. She was precise, relentless, and allergic to small talk. She was also, by her own private admission, profoundly lonely. It wasn't something she said out loud. She had learned that saying it made people uncomfortable, and that made them distant, which made everything worse. What she knew, the way you know something you've stopped arguing with, was that the 2 men she had loved the version of her that existed on paper, the valuation, the access, the name. When she finally understood this, she didn't cry. She rewrote her schedule and worked 14-hour days until the understanding calcified into something she could carry without flinching. She told her assistant she needed 4 days off the grid. No security detail, No phone registered to her name. She wanted to know what it felt like to exist without being recognized. She rented a motorcycle under a different name, packed one bag, and rode north toward the mountains. She made it as far as Aspen before the engine died. The snow had been falling for 3 hours by the time Sloane pushed the motorcycle off the main road. It wasn't a graceful moment. The bike was heavier than she'd anticipated. The shoulder of the road was uneven, and she was wearing a jacket designed for aesthetics rather than a Colorado blizzard at 11 p.m. Her fingers had gone numb somewhere around the 3rd mile. She had no signal on the burner phone. What she did have was a light, orange and steady, glowing through the white about a 1/4 mile ahead. She pushed toward it. The sign above the bay door read, "Webb's Garage," in hand-painted letters, the kind that told you the owner had done it himself. The light inside was the warm yellow of a space that was actually being used. She could hear something, a radio, low, and the occasional metallic knock of someone working. She knocked on the side door. The man who opened it was not what she expected, though she couldn't have said exactly what she had expected. He was tall, wearing a gray thermal and canvas work pants, with grease on his forearm and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead that he'd clearly forgotten were there. He looked at her, then past her at the motorcycle, then back at her. He didn't say, "Can I help you?" the way people said it when they meant, "What do you want?" He just stepped back and held the door open. "Get inside," he said. "Tow it in after." She did. His name was on the invoice he handed her 40 minutes later. She had stood near the space heater while he worked, watching him move around the bike with a quietness that felt practiced rather than natural. The quietness of someone who had learned to take up exactly the space required and no more. He didn't make conversation. He didn't ask where she was going or where she'd come from. He found the problem, a fuel line issue compounded by the cold, fixed it, and wrote it up. $60. She looked at the number. "That's it?" "That's the job," he said without looking up from the invoice. She handed him 420s. He opened the register, made change, and held out the bills. She told him to keep it. He set the exact change on the counter between them and moved on. It was such a small thing. She almost didn't recognize what it was at first. A man who simply was not interested in her money beyond what she actually owed him. She hadn't encountered that in longer than she could precisely remember. The blizzard made the decision for both of them. By midnight, visibility was near 0, and the roads out of Aspen had been closed by the county. Marcus made a phone call, checked something on his phone, and came back to where she was standing. "Roads are closed till morning," he said. "Sofa's clean. Take it or I'll call you a cab that won't come for 4 hours. She took the sofa. He brought her a blanket from a closet that smelled like cedar and laundry detergent, and a mug of hot chocolate that was clearly made from actual cocoa powder and not a packet. He set both down on the coffee table without ceremony and disappeared down the hall. She sat in the dim light of the garage apartment, listening to the wind press against the windows, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, completely anonymous. No one was going to call her name. No one was going to ask her to comment, to approve, to decide. She was just a woman on a sofa in a stranger's home during a snowstorm. She was asleep before she finished the hot chocolate. She woke to the smell of toast and the sensation of warmth that hadn't been there when she fell asleep. Someone had draped a second blanket over her. She sat up slowly. At the kitchen table, a small girl was eating cereal and reading a library book with the focused intensity of someone who did not intend to be interrupted. She hadn't called for her father. She hadn't stared. She had simply noticed that the guest was cold, covered her, and gone back to her breakfast. Sloane looked at the blanket for a moment. Then she looked at the girl, who glanced up briefly, nodded once as if they had already been introduced, and turned a page. Something in Sloane's chest shifted, quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a door that had been sealed for years, yielding just slightly at the frame. She came back 4 days later. Sloane told herself it was because Aspen was a reasonable base while she figured out her next few days. She told herself the mountain air was good. She told herself a lot of things on the drive back that she didn't entirely believe. She walked into Webb's garage at 10 in the morning and told Marcus she wanted to learn basic motorcycle maintenance. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man calibrating whether something was worth his time, then gestured toward the bike without a word. He was not a patient teacher in the conventional sense. He didn't soften instructions or repeat himself unnecessarily. When she grabbed the wrong wrench, he didn't laugh. He simply handed her the right one and waited. When she stripped a bolt from over-tightening, he took the tool from her, corrected it, and put the tool back in her hand. No comment. No performance of reassurance. She found it unexpectedly restoring. She was used to rooms that adjusted to her presence, people who became more careful, more performative, more transactional the moment they understood who she was. Marcus Webb's garage adjusted to nothing. The work was the work. She was either doing it correctly or she wasn't, and the engine didn't care about her net worth. She came back the next day. And the day after that. By the third afternoon, Lily had pulled Sloane into the kitchen to show her a recipe card written in faded cursive. Her grandmother's cornbread, she explained seriously, which had to be made in a cast-iron skillet or it didn't count. Sloane had never made cornbread. She had a private chef in San Francisco and a nutritionist who sent weekly meal plans. She stood at the counter and followed Lily's instructions with the same attention she gave board meetings. And when the cornbread came out slightly uneven on one side, Lily studied it and declared it acceptable. Then, without being asked, Lily went to the corner of the kitchen where an extra chair leaned against the wall, the one she had always kept there for no reason she had ever fully explained, and dragged it to the table. She positioned it carefully, adjusted it once, and stepped back to evaluate. "Okay," she said, satisfied, and went to get the plates. That evening, there were 3 places set at the table instead of 2. Marcus didn't comment on this. He sat down, passed the butter, and asked Lily about her spelling test. Sloane ate cornbread in a mechanic's kitchen in Aspen and could not identify a single thing she was supposed to want that she wanted more than this. The talk started the way talk always starts in small towns. Not with malice initially, but with curiosity that hadn't learned its own boundaries yet. A woman at the hardware store mentioned to someone that she'd seen a stranger coming and going from Webb's garage several days in a row. That someone mentioned it to someone else. By the end of the week, there were questions with no particular shape. Who is she? Where's she from? Why is she staying? Floating through the social fabric of the East End of Aspen like smoke. Sloane heard none of it directly. Marcus heard the edges of it. A slightly longer pause from a regular customer, a question from his neighbor that was framed as small talk but wasn't. He didn't raise it with Sloane, but she saw it in the way he stood at the garage entrance one evening, watching the street for a moment longer than necessary before closing the bay door. She knew what she should do. She should tell him. She should sit down at that kitchen table and explain who she was and let him make an informed decision about the risk she represented simply by being there. She knew what would happen if she did. He would step back. Not because he was weak, but because he was proud. The specific pride of a man who had built everything he owned with no one's help and no one's money, who would not be able to separate the truth about her from the appearance of something he'd never wanted to be. So she said nothing. She told herself she was protecting the space between them. She didn't examine, not yet, whether she was also protecting herself. It was a man named Gerald Portis who recognized her first. He was the kind of Aspen regular who wore his wealth the way other men wore cologne, constantly and without awareness. He came into Webb's garage on a Tuesday morning to drop off his Land Rover for a brake job, and he stopped walking when he saw Sloane standing at the workbench with a socket wrench in her hand and grease on her forearm. He looked at her the way people looked at something they couldn't place, a painting they'd seen in a museum, a song they couldn't name. Then it clicked. She watched it happen in real time, the slight widening of his eyes, the recalibration of his expression. He didn't say anything to her. He handed Marcus his keys, made a comment about the weather, and left. By Thursday, it was in 3 publications. The headlines were careful in the way that meant they were not careful at all. Billionaire Sloane Everett found safe in small-town mechanic's home. Everett disappearance ends in Aspen. What we know about the man she stayed with. Romance or strategy? Inside the unlikely connection between a tech titan and a local repairman. They used a photograph of Marcus that someone had pulled from the garage's business listing. Him standing in front of the bay door, arms crossed, unsmiling because he'd been squinting into the sun. In the context of the articles, the expression read as something else entirely. News vans appeared on the street outside the garage by Friday morning. Not many, 4, maybe 5, but enough to change the texture of the block. Neighbors who had walked past the garage every day for years now slowed their pace, glancing sideways at the cameras as if the building had become something different overnight. 2 officers from the Aspen Police Department came by on Friday afternoon. They were polite about it. They said they were following up on a concern raised regarding Ms. Everett's welfare. Just routine, they said, just making sure everything was in order. Marcus had heard those words before, arranged in different combinations, for different stated reasons, his entire adult life. He answered their questions in the same tone he used for everything, level, unhurried, giving them exactly what they asked for and nothing additional. Yes, she had come to the garage during the storm. Yes, she had stayed overnight because the roads were closed. Yes, she had returned several times since. No, he had not known who she was. No, he had not solicited any payment beyond the cost of the repair. When they left, he stood at the bay door and watched their car pull away. He wasn't angry about the attention. He wasn't angry about the cameras or the headlines or even the insinuation buried in the politely worded questions. What he was angry about, the specific, bone-deep anger of something recognized rather than discovered, was the look. The particular quality of assessment that entered a person's eyes when they were deciding, before he had said a single word, what category he belonged to. He had been on the receiving end of that look from customers and neighbors and strangers, and now police officers conducting routine welfare checks on women who stayed in his home. It was the same look. It had always been the same look. He had built a business, raised a daughter, served 2 tours in a war, and it was still, always, the same look. Lily heard things at school that she didn't repeat at home. Marcus knew this because she came home on Friday quieter than usual. Not the focused quiet of a child absorbed in something, but the sealed quiet of a child processing something she hadn't decided what to do with yet. She ate dinner without asking questions, which was how he knew something was wrong, because Lily always asked questions. A classmate had asked her what her dad had done to get on the news. She hadn't known what to say. She'd said nothing, which felt worse. At the table, she pushed her food around her plate and didn't look up. Marcus watched her for a moment, then continued eating and didn't press. He knew enough about silence to know that forcing it open rarely helped. But when he cleared the dishes and she still hadn't moved from her chair, he sat back down across from her. She looked up. Her expression was the one she used when she was trying to be older than 8.
"Did you do something wrong?"
she asked. He held her gaze. "No," he said. She nodded slowly, the way children nod when they believe something and also wish believing it were simpler. The video appeared on Saturday morning. Someone had pulled the footage from a security camera mounted on the building across the street, a real estate office that had been closed the night of the blizzard. The clip was 43 seconds long. It showed Marcus opening the side door of the garage, Sloane standing in the snow with the motorcycle, and Marcus stepping back to let her in. That was all it showed. There was no audio. Nothing in the footage was ambiguous if you watched it without a caption. The caption read, "He saw an opportunity. She didn't know it yet." By noon, it had 400,000 views. By evening, over 2 million. The comments divided along lines that had nothing to do with the 43 seconds of footage and everything to do with what people had already decided before they pressed play. One side called Marcus a good man doing a decent thing in bad weather. The other side built an elaborate theory from the gap between his income and hers, from the number of times she had returned to the garage, from the fact that he was a man and she was wealthy, and those 2 facts, in proximity, were apparently sufficient evidence of intent. Neither side asked him anything directly. He was discussed as though he were a variable in someone else's equation. Sloane's phone had been ringing since Thursday, but she had let her assistant manage the calls. On Saturday afternoon, she answered one herself. It was David Kellner, the managing director of Meridian's largest institutional investor. He was calm the way people were calm when they had already made a decision and were presenting it as a conversation. He told her that the board was concerned about perception, that the current media narrative created unnecessary noise around the company's leadership, that a brief, clear statement, something measured, something that clarified the nature of her time in Aspen, would settle things quickly and allow everyone to move forward. He emailed her the draft while they were still on the phone. She read it standing at the window of the room she'd taken at a small inn on the edge of town, the garage visible 3 blocks down the street if she leaned slightly to the left. The statement was 4 sentences: professional, neutral, technically accurate. It described the events of the blizzard as an incidental encounter, expressed gratitude for local hospitality, and confirmed that she was safe and returning to her responsibilities. It did not mention Marcus by name. It didn't need to. The function of the statement was to reduce him, to make him background, context, a footnote in her timeline rather than a person who had done something honest in bad weather and was now being publicly dissected for it. She set the phone down on the windowsill. She thought about what it would mean to sign it. The board would settle, the headlines would shift. The cameras outside the garage would find somewhere else to point within 48 hours. Her company would continue. Her reputation would be managed. And Marcus Webb, who had charged her $60 and handed her the change she told him to keep and never once searched her name, would spend the rest of his time in Aspen as the man a billionaire had quietly and officially deemed irrelevant. She thought about Lily eating dinner in silence on Friday night, trying to be older than she was. She did not sign the statement, but she also did not pick up the phone and call Marcus, or walk the 3 blocks to the garage, or do the thing she understood she needed to do. She sat with the unsigned document on her screen and told herself she was buying time, finding the right approach, waiting for the correct moment. She was still waiting when she fell asleep at the window. Outside, the cameras stayed where they were. The next morning, one of Marcus's longest-standing commercial clients, a property management company that had been using the garage for 6 years, sent an email informing him they would be pausing their account until the situation resolved. The graffiti appeared overnight. Marcus found it Monday morning when he unlocked the bay door at 6:30. Red spray paint across the lower half of the garage's exterior wall, 2 words angled and uneven, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who had made the decision quickly and in the dark. He stood in front of it for a moment without moving, his coffee going cold in his hand. He had painted that wall himself when he first opened the garage. The logo, the name, the clean lines, had taken him 2 weekends and 3 attempts to get right. He'd been proud of it in the quiet way he allowed himself to be proud of things, privately, briefly, and without making a production of it. He went inside and got the tarp. Lily saw it before he got the tarp back out. She had come around the corner of the building looking for him, backpack over one shoulder, lunch bag in her other hand, and she stopped walking when she saw the wall. She stood very still, reading the words in the flat morning light. She didn't cry. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she looked at Marcus and asked, very quietly, "Did you do something wrong?" He set down the tarp and crouched to her level. "No," he said. She studied his face with the precision she applied to everything. Whatever she found there, she accepted it. Not easily, but the way you accepted something you needed to be true, even when the world was making it complicated. She nodded. He walked her to the corner where the school bus stopped and watched until she was on it. Then he went back and covered the wall. The week that followed had the quality of a slow leak. Nothing catastrophic in any single moment, but the cumulative pressure of it was unmistakable. The property management company's email had been the first. A second client, a retired contractor who had brought Marcus work for 4 years, called to say he was going to hold off on the scheduled transmission job. Nothing personal, he said, just didn't want the hassle of being photographed going in and out of the place right now. A local blog published a piece speculating about the financial relationship between Marcus and Sloan, sourcing anonymous comments from people described as community members. Each thing was small. Together, they reconstructed something Marcus had spent 9 years trying to leave behind. The feeling of being watched without being seen, assessed without being known, doubted by default. He had felt it in the army, too, in subtler forms. The extra scrutiny during evaluations, the questions that weren't questions. He had outperformed it there through sheer discipline and because the mission gave him somewhere to direct his energy. In Aspen, there was no mission. There was just the garage and Lily and the slow erosion of a reputation he had built carefully and honestly over nearly a decade. Sloane came to the garage on Wednesday evening after the cameras had thinned out. Marcus was closing up. He heard her car and didn't turn around immediately, continuing to wipe down the workbench with the particular thoroughness of a man who needed something to do with his hands. She told him she was working on a response, that she hadn't signed the statement, that she was trying to find the right way to handle it. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he set the cloth down and turned around. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to answer it straight." She nodded. "Did you know this was going to happen? Not the specific thing, the cameras, the articles. Did you know that wherever you went, this kind of attention was going to follow?" She held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "I knew it was possible." He nodded slowly, absorbing this. "Then I need you to understand something," he said. "This isn't about me. I can take the looks. I've been taking them my whole life." He paused. "But Lily asked me twice this week if I did something wrong, and I don't have an answer that makes sense to an 8-year-old. He picked up his jacket from the hook by the door. "I think you should go back to San Francisco," he said. "Handle whatever you need to handle." He didn't say, "Don't come back," but he didn't say anything else either. The reporters had found the school by Thursday. Not many, 2 photographers and a woman with a microphone who stood on the public sidewalk outside the front entrance, technically within their rights, technically not breaking any rule. They weren't there for Lily specifically. They were there because the school was a detail in the story, a texture that made the narrative feel more complete, and children in the background of a shot added a particular kind of weight that editors liked. Lily came out of the building at 3:15 with her class, saw the cameras, and stopped walking. One of the photographers called her name. He said it gently, almost kindly, the way you might call a small animal you wanted to stay still. He had gotten it from somewhere, a neighbor, a comment section. It didn't matter where. She ran. She wasn't running toward anything. She was 8 years old and someone had said her name in a way that felt wrong, and her body made the decision before her mind could. She cut left across the front lawn, hit the uneven edge where the pavement met the grass, and went down hard. Right ankle turned beneath her, lunch bags skidding across the concrete, library books splaying open in the wet grass. A teacher reached her in seconds. Marcus got the call 4 minutes later. He was at the hospital before the school's follow-up call came through. The injury was a moderate sprain, significant enough to require wrapping and crutches for a week, not significant enough to keep her overnight. The doctor was thorough and kind. Lily sat on the examination table with her wrapped ankle extended and her jaw set in the expression she used when she had decided not to cry, and Marcus stood beside her with his hand on her shoulder and said very little. He had called Sloane himself while driving to the hospital, not because protocol required it, but because she was part of what had brought the cameras to that sidewalk, and whatever else was true between them, she needed to know. She arrived 40 minutes after he did. She walked into the waiting room and found Marcus standing at the window with his back to the door, still in his work clothes, still carrying the particular stillness of a man holding himself together through deliberate effort. She said his name. He turned around. He didn't look angry. He looked exhausted in the specific way of someone who had been fighting the same fight for so long that the fatigue had moved past feeling and into something structural, something built into the way he held his shoulders, the way he breathed. "She's okay," he said. "Sprain. She'll be on crutches for a week." "I'm sorry," Sloane said. "I know." There was a silence between them that was different from the comfortable silences in the garage. This one had weight. "Marcus, I've been thinking," he said, not unkindly, "about what you said Wednesday, about handling it." He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. "The thing is, I don't think it gets handled. Not the way you mean. You can put out a statement. The cameras will move to something else. Things will quiet down." He paused. "And then something else will happen, because that's how it works when your world and my world are in the same frame. Someone always wants to make it into something." She didn't argue with him. She knew he was right. "Your world wasn't built for people like me," he said. "I don't mean that as an accusation. I just mean it as a fact. And I can live with that fact when it's just me. But Lily asked me twice this week if I did something wrong, and today she ran from a camera and twisted her ankle on the lawn of her school." He shook his head slightly. "That's not a fact I can live with." He said he was thinking about Colorado Springs. His cousin had a place there, a quieter town, a fresh start. He said it the way people said things they had already decided, not asking for permission, not inviting a counter-argument. Sloan stood in the waiting room of Aspen Valley Hospital and watched him go back through the door to his daughter. She had never felt the specific weight of her own silence the way she felt it in that moment, not as protection, but as damage, as something she had let accumulate until it had reached a child's ankle on a wet lawn. She took out her phone. She made a call, not to her assistant, not to David Kellner, not to the board. She called the press line and asked for an open session the following morning. The press conference was held at 9 a.m. in the meeting room of a hotel 2 blocks from the garage. Sloan had not told her PR team about it until 7 that morning. Her assistant had called back within 4 minutes, voice carefully neutral in the way that meant she was managing alarm, to ask if Sloan wanted talking points prepared. Sloan said no. Her assistant asked if she wanted legal present. Sloan said no. Her assistant paused for exactly 3 seconds and then said she would arrange the room. There were 11 journalists present when Sloan walked in. No podium. She had asked them to remove it. She stood at the front of the room with a glass of water she didn't touch and looked at the people who had spent the past week constructing a story out of 43 seconds of security footage and the gap between 2 people's bank accounts. She did not begin with a statement. She began with a correction. "I want to establish what actually happened," she said, "because most of what has been published this week is not accurate, and I think that matters." She told them about the blizzard, about the motorcycle and the dead engine, and the orange light of the garage in the dark. She told them that Marcus Webb had not recognized her, had not searched her name, had not treated her as anything other than a stranger with a broken-down bike in bad weather. "He charged me $60, she said. "That is the standard rate for that repair. When I tried to give him more, he gave me back the change." She told them about the sofa and the cedar-smelling blanket and the hot chocolate made from scratch. She told them that she had come back the following week, and the week after that, and that Marcus had taught her basic mechanics with the same level of attention he gave every job, complete and without performance. "At no point," she said, "did he ask what I was worth. At no point did he ask about my company, my assets, my connections, or anything outside of what was directly in front of him. He asked me once if I preferred cocoa or coffee. That is the most personally invasive question he put to me in 3 weeks." A journalist near the back started to raise a hand. She kept going. "I want to be precise about something," she said. "The narrative that has been constructed around Marcus Webb, that he is a man with calculated motives, that his proximity to me represents some kind of strategy, is not supported by a single fact. It is supported by an assumption, and that assumption is not about his behavior. It is about who he is and what people have decided men like him do when they find themselves near women like me." The room was quiet in the particular way of people who were recalibrating. "If Marcus Webb were a white man in a wealthier zip code," she said, "this would have been a human interest story in the lifestyle section. It would have been charming. It would have been over in 4 days." She paused. "Instead, his business has lost clients. His property has been vandalized. His 8-year-old daughter sprained her ankle running away from a camera outside her school." She let that sit for a moment. "That is what the coverage produced. I want everyone in this room to be clear about what they participated in." A woman in the second row asked if Sloan was confirming a romantic relationship. I'm confirming that Marcus Webb is a person who deserves to be treated as one, Sloane said. The rest of it is not your business. Another journalist asked whether she felt her disappearance from public life had contributed to the media intensity. Yes, she said simply. And I am answering for my part in it right now. I should have spoken sooner. I didn't, because I was afraid of what honesty would cost me. That was a mistake, and it had consequences for someone who didn't deserve them. She took the glass of water finally and took a sip. The man who opened his garage in the middle of a blizzard for a stranger is the same man being described in your headlines as an opportunist. I'd like you to think about what it requires, what you have to already believe, for those two things to coexist. She thanked them for their time. She did not take additional questions. Walking out of the hotel into the cold morning air, she felt something she hadn't anticipated. Not relief, exactly, but the specific lightness of having stopped carrying something that had never been hers to carry quietly. The garage was 2 blocks away. She walked. The garage was open when she got there. Marcus was underneath a sedan on the hydraulic lift, doing something to the exhaust system that produced a low metallic rhythm she had come to associate with the particular focus he brought to difficult jobs. He didn't hear her come in over the sound of the work. She stood near the workbench and waited. When he rolled out from under the car and saw her, he sat up slowly and set down his wrench. He didn't say anything. He looked at her the way he looked at everything, directly, without performance, taking in what was actually there rather than what he expected. I watched it, he said finally. She nodded. He stood up, wiped his hands on the cloth he kept tucked into his belt, and looked at the floor for a moment. When he looked back up, his expression had shifted into something she hadn't seen from him before. Not softness exactly, but the absence of the particular guardedness he carried like equipment. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, I did, she said. I just did it later than I should have. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street. She noticed, and he noticed her noticing, that it was not a news van. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. Not about the press conference, not about any of that. He paused, choosing the words with the same care he chose tools. If none of this had happened, no cameras, no articles, no any of it, were you going to tell me? Eventually? She considered giving him a careful answer. She decided against it. I was afraid that if I told you, you'd step back, she said. Not because you didn't have feelings, but because you wouldn't want to be the man who got chosen by a billionaire. Because that's not who you are. He looked at her steadily. You're not wrong about that. I know. But you made that decision for me, he said. Not accusatory, just precise. I know that too, she said. I'm sorry. The hydraulic lift hummed faintly in the silence. Somewhere down the street, a door opened and closed. I'm not going to Colorado Springs, he said. She exhaled slowly. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it the same way I just asked mine. He looked at her. Not today, not this week, when there's still noise and it feels like something to stand up for. I mean in 2 years, 5 years, when it's just Tuesday and Lily has a school project and you've got a board call at 7 a.m. and the driveway needs shoveling. Can you be in that? In the ordinary version of this? She didn't answer immediately. She gave the question the weight it deserved. Yes, she said, as long as you don't disappear on me when it gets hard. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed the garage to the small kitchen area in the back, where a folding table served as everything. Prep surface, homework desk, the place where decisions got made over mugs of something hot. He picked up a chair that had been leaning against the wall and set it down at the table. Not offered, just placed, as if it had always been meant to go there. The cameras were gone within the week. There was a news cycle, and then there was the next news cycle, and the one after that. And Aspen settled back into its version of itself with the quiet efficiency of a place that had always considered the story someone else's to begin with. Not everyone changed their mind. A few clients never came back. Certain people on certain blogs kept the narrative alive for a while longer, because some stories are more comfortable than the truth that replaces them. But enough people reconsidered. Enough was enough to matter. The graffiti wall was repainted on a Saturday in early December. Not by a hired crew, but by the three of them, in the cold, with a tarp on the ground and two colors of paint that took longer to agree on than the actual painting did. Lily voted for blue. Marcus said the logo had always been black and white. Sloan pointed out that nothing about the current situation was strictly black and white, and Marcus looked at her for a moment and then picked up the blue brush. Lily wrote the sign herself, in the careful block letters she used for things that matter. On a piece of wood Marcus cut from a spare plank in the back. "We fix what others won't." She hung it above the bay door with help from a step stool and a level she insisted on using correctly. On a Tuesday evening in late December, three people sat at a folding table in the back of a garage in Aspen, drinking hot chocolate made from scratch. Lily was working through a chapter book with her index finger tracking each line, occasionally reading sentences aloud when she found them interesting enough to share. Marcus was going through invoices with a pencil, crossing things out and rewriting them with the thoroughness he applied to everything. Sloan was reading something on her phone, her free hand wrapped around her mug. Outside, the snow was falling the way it had the night they met, steady and indifferent and very beautiful. No cameras, no headlines, no one waiting to turn them into something. Just the table, and the chocolate, and the particular warmth of a space that had been built by one person and had slowly, without announcement, become somewhere that three people belonged. Lily looked up from her book and said to no one in particular, "This chapter is really good." Marcus said, "Read it out loud." She did. What stayed with me about this story isn't the billionaire or the headlines or the moment the cameras finally left. It's the chair. A little girl who had never been given a reason to trust easily, who grew up without a mother, in a town that never fully accepted her father, kept an empty chair at the table, just in case someone needed it. That's not something you teach a child. That's something a child learns from watching a parent who, despite everything the world threw at him, kept the garage lights on. Marcus Webb didn't make the news for being good. He made the news for being suspected. But the people whose lives actually touched his, they knew who he was from the very first night. If this story meant something to you, subscribe and stick around. Every week we bring you stories like this one, about quiet courage, about people who do the right thing without an audience, and about what it looks like when someone finally stands up and says, "Enough." We'll see you in the next one.